Patch 11.13 is absolutely massive, as we've got over 18 item changes, 2 of them being brand new introductions. Stridebreaker is seeing some huge adjustments, while a couple new split push oriented items will be hitting the Rift. In order to give you guys the lowdown on how everything will shape out, we brought together our challenger players and have been tracking the most recent analytics. What do you guys think of Riot trying to add new split pushing elements back into the game? I'm sure many of you remember when Banner of Command was super busted and Riot ended up removing it from the game entirely. It will be really interesting to see how they balance these new items, as I've got a suspicion they'll either end up super busted or completely worthless. Anyways, do you like the fact new items are being issued, or would you rather them be scrapped and left behind? Let us know down in the comments below. To stay completely up to date with the meta and all the educational content we produce, don't forget to drop a sub, and with all that said, we've got a lot to cover, so let's jump right into it. Anathema's Chains is the name of the first brand new item being introduced. Cost of the item is 2,500 gold. The base stats consist of 650 health and 20 ability haste. The active is called Vow, and it allows you to choose a nemesis to start building a vendetta over 60 seconds. This target you choose will deal 1% less damage to you per vendetta stack, scaling up to 30% less damage. At max stacks, your nemesis will have 20% reduced tenacity while near you. First champ that comes to mind who could be completely broken with this item is Shen. We all know how busted Warmogs has become due to the max health scaling on Shen Ultimate, and Anathema's Chains will now have the second most health for any item in the game. Something like Warmogs into Frostfire and then Anathema's could be a disgusting 3-item spike for Shen. We could even see Anathema's being a viable pickup on supports, as it's relatively cheap and the passive alone could be really strong to shut down the enemy carry. We'll be sure to keep you guys updated in our Sleeper OP video for 11.13 if any crazy new trends pop up surrounding Anathema's Chains, so watch out for that. Hullbreaker is the second new split push item that seems really insane on paper. The item costs 2,800 gold and provides you with 50 AD, 300 health, and 150% base health regen. The passive is called Boarding Party. While no allied champions are nearby, you gain 20 scaling to 45 armor and magic resist, along with 20% increased damage to towers. Your nearby large minions gain 60 scaling to 135 armor and magic resist, along with 200% increased damage to towers. So overall, Hullbreaker puts a lot more emphasis on your tower taking capabilities. Someone like Nasus could really shine with Hullbreaker as a second or third purchase. Yorick is another pick we see rising up in strength for 11.13, as his whole identity is built around split pushing. It'll be interesting to see how powerful an item combination of Hullbreaker and Anathemas turn out to be. Something like Divine Sunderer into Hullbreaker and Anathemas could be the ultimate side lane setup to wreak havoc in the 1v1. With any brand new item introductions, it's difficult to get a perfect read on how strong they'll be until we see them in action on live servers. However, both look very promising so far. As we collect more info on these two items throughout the patch, we'll be the first to share with you guys any new crazy setups that emerge, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. Whichever Rioter thought giving a dash to immobile bruisers like Garen and Darius was a good idea has finally come to their senses. Everyone but bruiser mains can rejoice, as the dash and Stridebreaker will be removed. To be fair, it may not even be all that bad though, as Riot plans to juice up the rest of the item's stats. The active can now be cast while moving. Active damage total AD ratio is going from 75 up to 100%. Slow is increased by a substantial amount, going from 40 decaying over 2 seconds up to 90% decaying to 40% over 3 seconds. Active cooldown will be lowered from 20 to 15 seconds. Passive move speed is being lowered from 30 down to 20. Mythic passive move speed will drop from 3 down to 2%. Health jumps up from 200 to 400, and lastly, the AD on the item goes from 45 down to 40. These changes are a lot to digest, but in short, the dash is gone on Stridebreaker, while you now have more damage and a stronger slow from the active. We expect picks who lack gap closers like Garen, Darius, and Set to become ever so slightly weaker. However, with all the bonus stats added in exchange, we don't see the item being as bad as people may think. The bonus 200 health is nothing to scoff at either, so it wouldn't shock us if Stride ends up being just as strong, if not stronger, than before. Moving on to Divine Sunderer, Riot will be issuing the item a ranged nerf for 11.13. The max health damage will be lowered from 12 to 9% for ranged characters. Most notably, this is a big blow to Ezreal and Senna. The original Divine buff saw the max health damage increased from 10 to 12%, so with it dropping to 9, you're actually receiving even less damage than before. Ez and Senna will see a significant drop in power due to these nerfs, which will affect their placements on the tier list. Mage items are finally getting a much needed boost for 11.13 as the cost of all 3 mythics will be reduced from 3,400 down to 3,200 gold. Although these changes benefit every single mage, one we're looking at who's already super strong is Sylas. Riot has no intents on directly nerfing Sylas for 11.13, so these Everfrost buffs will make him even more insane for solo queue. Watch out for Xayah support as well. She's already been trending upwards thanks to direct buffs a few patches back and will love the cost reduction on Liandry's. Moonstone Renewer will be buffed again as the heal and shield power per stack is going from 6 up to 7%. This change, combined with the Shurelya's nerf, which we'll cover in a moment, should spell the end of Shurelya's as the must-buy enchanter mythic. Moonstone has been pushed to the wayside over the past couple patches, but we expect that to change for 11.13. The active move speed on Shurelya's is being lowered from 60% decaying to 30% non-decaying. This change will make finding those crazy picks way less frequent and put the item in a much more balanced state. Our analysts believed Shurelya's to be one of the most broken items in general over the past months, so it's about time we saw some meaningful nerfs. Rakan will be hit hardest by this change, as he doesn't really have a great alternative mythic. Most other Shurelya's users are perfectly fine building Moonstone, so the overall power level of enchanters shouldn't drop too dramatically. We'll just be seeing less annoying Shurelya's spam, which is a very welcoming change as far as we're concerned. A sizable buff to Ghost Poro is headed to live, as the duration on the Poro is being increased from 60 to 90 seconds, while the reveal duration will be bumped up from 4 to 6 seconds. Junglers who run Domination will have much more of an incentive to grab Ghost Poro instead of Eyeball Collector. Eyeball has been a boring default option on almost every single Domination user in Season 11, so it will be nice to have some added variation. In games where you lack the ability to force fights early on and are playing to scale, grabbing Poro over Eyeball will be the better option. A small nerf to Cosmic Drive is on the way, as its move speed will be lowered from 10 scaling to 30 down to 20 flat. Ability power will be increased from 75 up to 80. Very minor change overall that won't alter the strength of the item. The movement speed on Nimbus Cloak will be lowered from 5 scaling to 35% down to 5 scaling to 25%. On certain champions who can take advantage of absolute focus and water walking, we likely see Nimbus phased out for 11.13. The nerf isn't the end of the world though, as we still expect it to be run on a large number of champions. Galeforce will have its mythic passive move speed lowered from 3 down to 2%. A small indirect nerf to the likes of Jhin, but not enough to the point where you'd want to stop building it. A major nerf to Prowler's Claw is on the horizon, as the cooldown will be increased from 60 up to 90 seconds. Lethality drops from 21 down to 18, and you can no longer use the active on enemy minions. As if Varus wasn't already hurt enough from his nerf last patch, this change drops him down the tier list even further. Talon has the option of building Bruiser, so he won't be affected as much, but someone like Qiyana, who thrives with Prowlers, will be hit quite hard. Zed's in the same boat as Talon, where he can do just as well with an alternative being Eclipse, so he won't be affected at all too much. Prowler's Kayn will likely be dead now, as Gore Drinker becomes the #1 option. A small adjustment to Trinity Force is being issued, with the attack damage increased from 30 up to 35, while the on-hit move speed is decreased from 25 down to 20. Pretty negligible change that won't influence your decision as to whether or not Trinity is a good purchase. Lich Bane sees a very similar change, where Riot is shaving off a little move speed in exchange for some damage. Move speed is lowered from 10 down to 8%, while the ability power jumps up from 70 to 75%. The health on Black Cleaver is being increased from 400 up to 450 in compensation for the move speed per carved stack being lowered from 5 down to 3. Yet another change to reduce mobility that won't significantly alter the overall strength of the item. Deadman's Plate will have the charge time on passive decreased from 8 to 4 seconds. Max move speed on the passive drops from 60 down to 40. The damage is going from 1 scaling to 100 magic damage based on stacks to 1 scaling to 40 plus 100% base AD based on stacks. These changes make Deadman's a less enticing pickup on supports or tanks, but likely won't reduce the item's strength enough to where you'd stop buying it. And our final item change of the patch goes the way of Death's Dance, with the heal on champ takedown being increased from 10 to 15%. Takedowns, however, will no longer grant 30% bonus move speed over 2 seconds. You could see this as a net nerf to Hecarim in certain situations, as he benefits more than other champions with that extra move speed. All in all, like these previous few changes, they're more or less just power shifts that won't have a drastic effect on the overall strength of the item. The only top lane change we have for 11.13 is a nerf to Riven. In higher brackets of play, Riven has had one of the highest win rates over the past few patches, which is the reason for her nerf. E-Shield is being reduced from 95 scaling to 215, down to 80 scaling to 200. 15 shield off at rank 1 is a pretty reasonable nerf. Since Riven's been in such a good spot recently, we don't see the change being enough to force her down the tier list. It's kinda like the Wukong nerf last patch. A decent change, but won't do much in the grand scheme of things. This patch is a lot lighter in regards to the champion changes, so let's jump right into the top lane tier list. Our OP tier consists of Wukong, Shen, and Set. Yorick will be pushed up into S tier as we believe the new split push items will give him a major boost in strength. Nasus is another pick to really watch out for who should thrive with the new items. Champs like Darius, Garen, and Set who excelled with Stridebreaker will be ones to watch throughout 11.13. Some people may think removing the dash is the end of the world for these picks, but with all the new stats added on, we don't think that will be the case. The Divine Sunderer changes only hit ranged champs, so expect abusers like Camille, Jax, and Wukong to continue dominating. As the patch progresses, we'll get a much better read on which picks begin to stand out with the new item changes. Be sure to catch our mid-patch update tier list where we'll fill you in on all the new trends that emerge. Top 3 low elo picks of the patch will be Wukong, Yorick, and Nasus, while the best bans remain Set, Wukong, and Gwen. A few jungle nerfs to a couple highly contested picks in high elo are set to drop as Rumble is the first champion targeted. W cooldown will be increased from 6 flat up to 7, scaling to 6 seconds. The change is massive because it prevents you from being able to overheat until hitting level 2. In turn, first buff clear will become so much weaker for 11.13. W move speed is also nerfed, going from 15 scaling to 35% down to 10 scaling to 30%. These nerfs should spell the end for Rumble jungle. He may see some success in the higher brackets of play, but for the majority of elos, we wouldn't recommend picking him up. B tier is where Rumble lands on our tier list. Lee Sin has taken over the jungle meta and has even become crazy strong in the solo lane, so Riot is looking to tone him down. E damage will be reduced from 100 scaling to 260 down to 100 scaling to 220. Jungle Lee really shouldn't be affected all too much by this change as he doesn't max E until last. It's actually top and mid Lee that will see a major shift in power as they max E out first. If you're a jungle Lee main, don't worry, he's not going anywhere and will remain a strong S tier pickup. Olaf will be receiving a health per level buff going from 93 up to 100. This equates to around 70 extra health for mid-game, which is a little less than 200 gold worth of stats. Nothing crazy by any means, but a decent buff nonetheless. Olaf has been really close to breaking back into A tier in previous patches, so with this buff, we'll push the Barbarian back up. As for the complete jungle tier list, we have Kha'Zix, Shaco, and Xin Zhao continuing to decimate the rest of the competition. Rammus has been very quietly performing exceptionally well after his buff from last patch, so we'll be pushing him up into S tier. The best junglers for low elo include Warwick, Xin Zhao, and Fiddlesticks. Highest priority bans for 11.13 are Shaco, Xin Zhao, and Kha'Zix. The only mid lane change penciled in is one to try and weaken Viego Mid's power and give him a boost in the jungle. Q minion healing is being reduced from 100 down to 50%. E move speed will be increased from 20 scaling to 30% up to 25 scaling to 35%. E missile speed is going from 1000 up to 1200, while the missile length sees an increase from 700 up to 775. The Q minion healing nerf is quite impactful as the cooldown on the spell is very low, so you'll be losing out on a ton of sustain over time. Your roam plays will become a little stronger with that extra move speed, but it shouldn't be enough to outweigh the Q nerf. We'll be dropping Viego Mid from S down into A tier for 11.13. As for the mid lane tier list, we have Katarina, Sylas, and Zed as the 3 OP picks. Sylas becomes even stronger due to the indirect buffs from Everfrost, so he's without a doubt a pick or ban now. Rumble will be dropping from OP down to S as the W nerf not only hurts him in the jungle, but in the mid lane as well. Due to the Lee Sin E nerf, he will be pushed down from S into A. Our top 3 champs for low elo are Diana, Malz, and Annie, while the best bans are Katarina, Sylas, and Zed. It's about time Xayah receives a buff, as Riot will be increasing her Q damage per dagger from 45 scaling to 125 up to 50 scaling to 150. Even though the damage is up by 25 at max rank, it's not all that impactful since you don't max Q out until last. If this were a buff to E damage, then we'd have a conversation, but the change unfortunately won't do much. We'll give Xayah the bump into B tier, but she'll still remain on the weaker side compared to many other marksmen. The Aphelios Buffs from last patch did absolutely nothing in regards to his strength, so Riot's back at it again. Passive AD will be increased from 4 scaling to 24 up to 5 scaling to 30. Passive lethality is being increased from 3.5 scaling to 21 up to 4.5 scaling to 27. We don't see these changes having a big enough effect to move Aphelios up the tier list, so he'll remain in C tier for the time being. Breaking down the ADC tier list, we have a rather unique patch, as there won't be a single AD carry placed in OP tier. The nerf to Divine Sunderer drops Ezreal down out of OP, and there really isn't a specific AD carry who will stand above all else. Many picks in S tier are very close in power level for 11.13, which means you have so many great options to choose from. Draven's great after his buffs last patch, Kog'Maw is finally in a good spot, Jinx is still an amazing option, and so on and so forth. It's actually quite refreshing to see many viable options instead of 2 picks with over 40% play rates like we saw earlier in the season. Jhin does see a small indirect nerf due to the Galeforce change, but it won't be impactful enough to warrant dropping him a tier. The best low elo bot lane carries are Veigar, MF, and Sivir. Highest value bans are Vayne, Ezreal, and Samira. The only support change for 11.13 is the long-awaited Tahm Kench mini rework. Tahm Kench passive is exactly the same as before, however, the bonus magic damage is being lowered from 4% max health down to 2%. Tahm Q is almost exactly the same with a few tweaks thrown in. One new feature is that Q will heal on hit. Cooldown is slightly higher earlier on, and the mana cost is lower at later ranks. The damage is the exact same, however, the slow has been decreased at later ranks. The massive change is to Tahm W, as it's being completely reworked. Tahm W is now called Abyssal Dive, and will be a mini version of his old ultimate. The cooldown is 21, scaling to 17 seconds. Tahm dives down and reappears at target location, dealing 100, scaling to 240, plus 100% AP magic damage, and knocks up all enemies in the area for 1 second. Devoured ally units can be taken along. Tahm E is the exact same ability as before, however the shield duration will now last 2.5 seconds instead of 2 seconds. You'll also have to be out of combat for 4 seconds instead of 2.5 seconds for the Grey Health heal to activate. Devour is Tahm Kench's new ultimate, which is a buffed up version of his old W. The cooldown will be 120, scaling to 80 seconds. On enemy champ use, Tahm requires 3 stacks of passive and then can devour the enemy for up to 3 seconds, dealing 100, scaling to 400 plus 15% of their max health magic damage. Tahm is still slowed and grounded during the effect. On ally champion use, this is where things get spicy. You now grant teammates a shield blocking 300, scaling to 600 plus 100% AP damage for up to 2.5 seconds after being spit out. Overall, Tahm should be a much more rewarding champion for solo queue with less reliance on his carries in order to win games. The 20 seconds cooldown on W will offer up so much more playmaking potential, and the shield from ult will keep carries even safer in fights. For now, the River King will be placed in B tier, but we'll keep a close eye on him and adjust accordingly for our mid-patch update tier list. The only major shift for the support tier list in 11.13 is moving Senna from OP down to S. The Divine Sunderer nerf will hurt a substantial amount, which is the reason to why she's moving down. Lulu now stands alone as the only OP pick of the patch. Shurelya's nerfs will hurt the playmaking potential of a couple supports, but won't be the cause for any movement on the tier list. After all, Moonstone is seeing buffs, so most enchanters will have a couple options to choose from depending on the game. Watch out for Xayah, as the buffs to Liandry's will give her another boost in strength. We have Xayah and Brand rated as 2 of the top 3 picks for low elo, and they become even stronger, so we'd highly recommend spamming in 11.13. Leona is the 3rd champ we rate highly for the lower ranks, while Thresh, Lulu, and Leona are the best bans. And remember, if you want to improve fast and get the rank you've always wanted, then check out skillcap.com, link in the description below. So, that's what the meta will be looking like heading into 11.13. As new trends emerge throughout the patch, we'll be sure to update you guys in our mid-patch tier list, so don't forget to subscribe to stay in the loop. Thanks so much for watching, good luck in solo queue, and have a great day.